faithfully delivering value by interpreting the world's best books.
Hello, this is Sally's Book Talk.
Today, I'm going to introduce you to a book called Cognitive Nature. This book compiles the research of 11 psychologists, helping you rediscover what learning is all about. When it comes to learning, many people find it frustrating. From a young age, teachers and parents tell us that hard work can make up for shortcomings, and the slow bird must start early. As long as you focus on one thing for long enough, repeating it over and over, you'll definitely remember it firmly. But in reality, it's not that simple. Many people have faced this struggle. In class, you take careful notes, follow the teacher's key points, spend time reviewing after class, but still can't remember. Learn something new and forget the old. You put in effort, sometimes feel you've got it, but when the test comes, you can't perform, grades don't improve, and applying knowledge is out of reach. So why is that? The book Cognitive Nature we're covering today will provide the answer. This book has 3 authors. Henry Roediger and Mark McDaniel are psychology professors at Washington University in St. Louis, experts in human learning and memory. For the past 50 years, they've studied the brain's memory mechanisms. They also led a team of 11 cognitive psychologists over 10 years to first propose the relationship between human cognition and learning, applying this research to education. The third author, the author Peter Brown, is a renowned writer, skilled in science writing. In this book, they combined the latest neuroscience findings to reveal the secrets of efficient learning. Published in 2014, the book quickly became an Amazon bestseller in learning and held the top spot on psychology and cognition charts for 5 years straight. And now I'll break down the book for you in 3 parts. First, what is the essence of learning? What are its key steps? Second, why doesn't cramming work? Third, how should we learn? Let's start with the first part. What is the essence of learning? And what are its steps? The authors believe learning isn't just gaining knowledge or skills. It's about flexibly applying them. The essence is building mental models, deeply embedding knowledge for automatic response. We can think of mental models as an app in our brain. When this program launches, you can react quickly to problems without needing much time to analyze or think. A classic example is driving. It's a combination of complex actions requiring hand-foot coordination while staying constantly aware of your surroundings. When first learning to drive, you must focus completely, following the instructor's steps one by one. But with continuous practice, driving becomes automated. Just sitting in the driver's seat, you instinctively know how to start the car without overthinking. On the road, you don't repeatedly remind yourself when to accelerate or brake. More experienced drivers better know how to make accurate judgments in critical moments. This happens because our brain develops a driving-related mental model. The mental model development process has 3 steps: encoding, consolidation, and retrieval. Simply put, encoding is when the brain converts sensory input into meaningful information. Like jotting down key points in a notebook while reading, this forms short-term memory. Consolidation strengthens it through spaced review, turning it into long-term memory. During consolidation, the brain reprocesses new knowledge and links it to existing long-term memories. Retrieval means extracting learned knowledge to solve real-world problems. Let's revisit driving as our example. At driving school, the instructor first teaches basic knowledge and skills. You note useful information, step 1 in mental model development. Next, the instructor guides you through practicing these skills. From starting the engine to parking, practicing each action individually. Initially, you mechanically repeat instructions with clumsy coordination. But with each practice, you grow familiar with the flow and recognize patterns. This process is knowledge consolidation. But it doesn't mean you've mastered driving. You still need real road experience. At this point, you might find a driving coach to take you on the road, where you'll encounter all sorts of situations. During this process, you need to retrieve knowledge from memory, extract what's useful, and apply it to solve real problems. Only when you can drive skillfully in various environments have you truly mastered the skill. For the brain to form long-lasting memories, all three steps, encoding, consolidation, and retrieval, are essential. It's like a snowball effect. New knowledge builds on existing knowledge, and the more we learn, the more connections form between old and new. What you need to do isn't just absorb new knowledge, but also integrate it with what you know and apply it in life. All right, that covers the essence of learning and its three steps. Now let's move to the second aspect, why cramming doesn't work. The authors identify two main reasons. First, mere repetition doesn't create lasting memories. As mentioned earlier, people believe spending enough time on something guarantees solid memorization. So many learners intensely focus on one skill, drilling through repetition until it seems memorized. For example, before exams, many pull all-nighters to cram. Similarly, many short-term crash courses promise quick results through concentrated practice, making learners feel they've made progress. Last-minute cramming might yield decent exam scores, but science disproves this. Mere repetition of textbook content doesn't cement long-term memory. And better, a University of Washington study divided 148 students into two groups, having them read 5 passages from textbooks and Scientific American. One group read once, the other twice consecutively. Students then reported what they'd learned and remembered, showing no significant difference between groups. This shows repetition alone doesn't strengthen memory. Even when effective, it's temporary. Research finds cramming might help ace an upcoming test, but the forgetting happens rapidly. Usually, 2 days after an exam, students have already forgotten half of the crammed knowledge. This is because human memory follows a forgetting curve. About 70% of what we read or hear is forgotten very quickly. After that, the rate of forgetting slows down, and the remaining 30% is gradually forgotten. In this process, we must find ways to interrupt forgetting. And to interrupt forgetting, we need to secure the knowledge chain in our brains. Not. It's like when stringing beads. You not only thread the beads, but also tie a knot to ensure they don't fall off the end. Consolidation and retrieval are this knot tying process. By reviewing and repeatedly applying knowledge, we connect old and new information, making memories more solid. Cramming, on the other hand, just inputs new knowledge without building connections or enabling retrieval to solve problems. This results in only temporary memories. Cramming is ineffective. The second reason is that it damages a person's metacognition. Metacognition refers to our ability to judge what we know and don't know, but cramming creates an illusion of mastery. For example, some students cram intensely and can recite lessons verbatim. Such students easily believe they've mastered the essence, but there's a big difference between memorizing and truly understanding and applying knowledge. When questions are phrased differently on an exam, they may not know how to respond. Once metacognition is impaired, we can't identify gaps in our knowledge, don't know where to focus efforts, and can't achieve desired learning outcomes. Having covered what learning methods are ineffective, now let's move on to the third aspect, how to learn more efficiently for the brain. We've summarized 4 methods for you. The first method is retrieval practice. The ultimate goal of learning is to build mental models that enable correct judgments in complex, changing environments. And retrieval practice helps strengthen memory, build mental models, and handle complex situations. In practice, retrieval exercises come in various forms, like pop quizzes after class, self-testing with spaced intervals, and mixing different subjects or skills during practice. And the most common retrieval exercise we use daily is exams. Researchers once conducted an experiment dividing students into 2 groups who listened to the same story. The story contained 60 item names. One group was tested immediately after, the other after a week. Results showed immediate test students remembered 53% initially, dropping to 39% after a week.
The group not tested immediately only remembered 28% after a week.
Meaning,
Immediate testing boosted retention by 11% after a week.
For retrieval practice to work best, there are two key principles. First, multiple spaced out retrievals work better than single attempts with intervals between. Psychologists found that the more you forget something, the more effective relearning becomes, creating longer lasting memories. This happens because time gaps cause some forgetting. When you retrieve knowledge, your brain works harder to revisit and integrate it, triggering consolidation. So, what's the ideal interval? The authors recommend spacing sessions at least a day apart, letting sleep cause some forgetting, but not so long you forget everything and restart from scratch. For retrieval practice, the second key is diversifying content, like mixing different topics or skills during practice. The authors give an example. A teacher taught two student groups to calculate volumes of four uncommon geometric solids. And these were wedge, spheroidal cone, sphere, and semicone. Then they did practice problems. One group's problems were grouped by solid type. First four wedge problems, then four spheroidal cone problems, and so on. The other group had mixed practice with different solids interleaved randomly. Results showed that students who did interleaved practice scored an average of 63% correct on the test a week later, while those without interleaved practice only scored 20%. So diversified practice not only aids long-term memory but also promotes flexible application of knowledge. Neuroscience research found that single-topic practice and diversified practice activate different brain regions. The more complex the practice, the greater the challenge for the brain. Um, at this point, the brain activates a higher level region to handle these complex issues, thereby better consolidating memories. Additionally, diversified practice helps extract fundamental principles from varied content. You'll then more easily find correct answers in unfamiliar situations. For example, when learning math, many people study chapter by chapter. Homework is usually chapter-based too. It seems you've mastered each chapter, but come finals when all problems are mixed, some can't even tell which formula to use. But if students regularly mix different chapters during practice, come exam time, they'll easily retrieve the most suitable formula to solve problems. This is what we call the first method of efficient learning. First, building mental models through repeated, spaced, and varied retrieval practice. Now, let's move to the second method for efficient learning, creating desirable difficulties, enhancing learning through productive interference. Desirable difficulties are challenges that trigger encoding and retrieval processes, adding positive value to learning. Psychologists found that learning ease and effectiveness are inversely related. The more effort you expend learning something, the more solidly you learn it. The easier the learning, the worse the outcome. So, introducing desirable difficulties strengthens learning. For instance, the U.S. Army used desirable difficulties when training paratroopers. In class, trainees weren't allowed notebooks or note-taking. The only requirement was to listen, observe, and mentally rehearse parachute techniques. And next, trainees underwent varied difficulty drills and tests. First, you'll learn tuck and roll landings in different positions, then practice jumping from heights of 0.6 meters, 3.6 meters, and 10.4 meters. You'll also learn to handle special situations like equipment failures and landing with heavy combat gear. All training is spaced and interleaved.
If you survive 3 weeks without elimination, trainees proceed to actual parachute training. Graduation requires 5 jumps from military aircraft.
In this process, both the no-note-taking role and interleaved training represent desirable difficulties, intentionally increasing challenge to make learning more effortful. But this makes learning more effective and helps form permanent knowledge in the brain. In daily learning, we can actively create desirable difficulties to boost effectiveness. For example, teachers might design syllabi differently from textbook sequences. This forces students to connect concepts themselves to grasp the course's essence. Or during tests, use essay questions instead of multiple choice, requiring students to formulate answers rather than select options. For self-testing, increase difficulty by summarizing core ideas aloud or teaching concepts to others instead of rote memorization. But note, desirable difficulties are challenges learners can overcome with increased effort. For aspiring TV hosts, a desirable difficulty might be summarizing news while someone talks in your ear to practice paraphrasing and adaptability. If you lack foundational knowledge to tackle a challenge, it becomes undesirable. Like English textbooks with zero Chinese translations for beginners, that's undesirable difficulty. The third efficient learning method is establishing effective feedback mechanisms to counter cognitive biases. Learning efficiency depends on comprehension ability and self-assessment skills. Comprehension is straightforward, how well and quickly you understand and apply knowledge. But to improve, you must also judge what you know versus don't know, enabling continuous adjustment. But these judgments often get tripped up by all kinds of cognitive biases, making us unable to make accurate calls, like illusions and memory distortions. Psychologists found that for past events, we always spin the story from our own angle and don't even realize we might be bending the truth. We think our memories of the past are spot on, but truth is, they're easily warped, and we often fool ourselves into thinking we've got a grip on familiar stuff. But honestly, a lot of that is just us filling in the blanks in our heads. Researchers ran an experiment where subjects read a passage about Helen Keller that only said, the girl was wild, stubborn, and manic.
But tons of folks came away thinking the girl wasn't just hot-headed, she was deaf and blind.
That's readers totally making it up based on what they already thought about Helen Keller. Swap out Helen Keller's name for someone else, and they didn't mess up like that. Whether it's illusions or twisted memories, and learning, they throw off our ability to judge how we're doing. To dodge cognitive biases, we got to set up an objective, solid feedback system, ideally with clear benchmarks. In flight sims, pilots can zip check their moves on the dash to see if anything's off. And if something pops up, they can fix it fast using the dash data.
That's why even the most seasoned pilots keep hitting the sim bay for checkups.
Because they don't get enough real-deal crises, so they rely on sims to keep their edge. If there's no dashboard-like tool to size up your skills, you gotta lean on teachers or buddies to give you the lowdown. The real test of learning? Can you mash up old and new knowledge to draw your own dots? Like, to see if you've got a piece down, try spitting out the key bits in your own lingo. Plus, this feedback loop's gotta stay dynamic, meaning you keep testing and recalling to sniff out and patch up weak spots. Dynamic testing breaks down into 3 steps. First up, you run the test. To ace it, take a look at where your knowledge or skills might be lacking. The second step is to boost your abilities through spaced practice or other methods. The third step is to test yourself again, seeing what areas have improved and where more effort is needed. It's a process of honing skills, like writing a novel. After the first draft, you show it to others for feedback, then revise it again. This way, you can address your weaknesses and unlock your potential as much as possible. The fourth method for efficient learning is to cultivate a habit of lifelong learning. Scientific research shows that human intelligence isn't fixed. We can boost it by increasing neural connections in the brain. At birth, we have about 100 billion nerve cells called neurons. They're connected by synapses that transmit signals. These synapses form neural circuits, and the number of these connections determines a person's memory and learning ability. The good news is, neural connections keep changing. Even at 60, they're still developing. So, as long as we live and learn, we can constantly reshape our brains and enhance intelligence. In the book, the author introduces 3 main strategies to help us develop lifelong learning habits. These strategies are a growth mindset, deliberate practice, like experts, and creating memory cues. First, let's talk about growth mindset by psychologist Carol Dweck from Stanford University. She categorizes mindsets into 2 types, fixed mindset and growth mindset. These 2 mindsets are quite different. People with a fixed mindset believe intelligence is set at birth and hard to change. When they fail, they think it's due to their incompetence. Those with a growth mindset believe intelligence can be developed, so they actively learn and, when failing, dig deep to try different strategies. For example, for people with dyslexia, learning reading skills is tough.
Fixed mindset folks might give up, feeling hopeless about life.
But growth mindset individuals practice developing flexible or compensatory skills to make up for innate shortcomings. For instance, though they struggle with understanding text, they can cultivate the ability to interpret information from their surroundings. Or the second strategy for lifelong learning is deliberate practice like an expert. Many believe professionals are born with talent, but psychologist Anders Ericsson found it takes 10,000 hours or 10 years of practice on average to become an expert in a field. The best among them spend most of their time on solo, deliberate practice. So, meaning expert-level performance comes from high-quality, deliberate practice, not genetics. Deliberate practice isn't mindless repetition. It's goal-oriented, targeted training to constantly surpass yourself, your current level. During this, practitioners must think about improvement, keep experimenting, to build mental models for handling complexity and getting better each time. And, for instance, a chess champion considers multiple moves while studying positions. Each move builds mental patterns. Deliberate practice works best under a coach's guidance. They give precise feedback, helping learners identify areas needing work. Learning reshapes the brain. Sustained, purposeful practice builds new neural connections, expanding abilities. The third lifelong learning strategy, using tools to create memory cues. For example, some use visual imagery, since pictures stick better than words. When memorizing fruit vocabulary, picture the actual fruits in your mind. Others use physical movements like pilots mining flight procedures to memorize sequences. A more advanced method is the memory palace for complex material. Simply link what you need to remember to physical locations, creating memory cues. Take your home. If shopping and fearing forgotten items, mentally walk through rooms. Say you need cabbage, umbrella, candles, roses. Imagine touring your home. Roses on the living room table, candles in the bedroom, then to the kitchen. You crave stir-fried cabbage. Bathroom drips sound like rain, reminding you to buy an umbrella. By using familiar scenes, we can connect all that messy info together, making it way easier to remember. With that said, we've pretty much covered cognitive nature. To recap, the essence of learning is building mental models, which means deeply embedding knowledge into your brain through boosted memory, turning it into a reflex. It can be split into 3 steps: encoding, consolidation, and retrieval, all absolutely essential. There are 4 methods to make our learning more efficient. First, use retrieval practice to build your own mental models. Second, create desirable difficulties to enhance learning through productive interference. Third, set up efficient feedback mechanisms to break cognitive biases. Fourth, cultivate a lifelong learning habit. All right, cognitive nature. That's all for this book's interpretation. Book notes are below the audio. See you next time.